imagine stepping into, arguably the most dynamic, wealthy, opportunity-rich job market in human history.
Right.
And despite all that opportunity, you are undeniably miserable. I mean, we're talking about a whole demographic entering the workforce in countries practically defined by, like, entrepreneurial spirit, and yet their internal reality is just this profound exhaustion.
Yeah, it forces us to confront a really uncomfortable reality, honestly, because that traditional equation we all grew up with, that economic opportunity automatically equals personal well-being, it's just completely breaking down for this specific demographic.
Exactly. So today we are unpacking this incredibly revealing article titled, "Gen Z isn't just burned out, they're unhappy."
Such a powerful title.
It really is. And it breaks down this new, highly rigorous data from the 2026 World Happiness Report, which was put together by researchers at Oxford University in partnership with Gallup. So the mission for our deep dive today is twofold. First, we need to understand the underlying mechanisms of why the youngest members of our workforce are hitting this wall.
Yeah, the why is crucial.
And second, we want to extract the actual actionable playbook from this research on how leaders can fix it within their own teams.
Because we really have to move past those superficial conversations about, like, kids these days.
Yes.
We have to look at the systemic pressures they're actually operating under, because the data in this report is just staggering, especially when you look at how different countries rank regarding the changes in happiness for people under 25.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the numbers for some of the wealthiest nations they're jarring.
They really are.
So the report looked at 136 different countries, right?
Yeah.
Out of those, the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand ranked near the very bottom.
Wow.
Yeah, they landed somewhere between 122nd and 133rd place for changes in happiness among Gen Z.
What's fascinating here is the implications of that. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
The very countries most associated with ambition and high-octane growth and material success.
The dream, right?
Exactly. They are the exact places producing some of the unhappiest young people on Earth. We're seeing this complete decoupling of environmental wealth and internal psychological health. Gen Z employees are officially the unhappiest group in the workforce.
I was trying to think of how to describe this, and it's almost like it's like taking a seed and planting it in the most expensive, nutrient-rich soil on the planet.
Okay, yeah.
And then you just watch it inexplicably wither. Like, the resources are technically there, right?
Right, the soil is supposedly perfect.
Yes, but they aren't translating into growth or momentum. So obviously we have to ask why. If sheer economic opportunity isn't making them happy, what is actively dragging them down?
Well, if the source material points right at the environment this generation was raised in.
Which is a digital world.
Exactly. The digital landscape is like this invisible variable in the modern workplace. But the research really demands that we be highly precise here, because it's so easy to just fall into that lazy narrative of, like, phones are bad.
Just put the phone away, yeah.
Right. But the data from the 2026 report reveals this crucial nuance about how technology is actually consumed. It's not just about screen time. It's about the distinction between active and passive digital behavior.
Right, and this is where we get into the actual mechanics of the burnout. The report confirms that, sure, heavy social media use correlates with a decline in well-being.
Yeah.
But the type of use is the key. Passive scrolling, getting caught in those algorithmic feeds, consuming endless streams of influencer content. Those are the specific mechanisms that just drain a person's psychological reserves.
Because if we look closely at how a passive feed works, it relies on a slot machine psychological mechanism.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, the user is basically stripped of their agency. They aren't actively searching for information. They aren't building a connection. They're just receiving whatever the algorithm decides to serve them next.
Just pulling the lever over and over.
Exactly, pulling the lever. There's no completion metric, there's no end goal, and there's absolutely no sense of accomplishment. It's an endless loop of passive consumption that, over time, actually induces this state of learned helplessness.
Wow. Learned helplessness.
Yeah, and it depletes the brain's dopamine reserves entirely.
But on the flip side, the research also points out that internet activity centered around, like, communication or learning or content creation, those are actually linked to higher life satisfaction.
Right, because there's agency.
Exactly. If you're using a platform to learn a new coding language or organize a real-world event, you're the one directing the tool. The tool isn't directing you.
Yeah, the platform design literally dictates the emotional outcome for the user. Passive algorithmic consumption puts the user in this state of constant social comparison, but without any of the actual, the buffer of authentic human connection, it's inherently isolating and it leaves the individual cognitively fatigued.
Okay, but I have to push back here a little bit.
Go for it.
Because think about it. A logistics manager in Ohio or a startup founder in Austin, they aren't coding the TikTok algorithm, right?
No, of course not.
So how is this their problem? They're just trying to run a supply chain or ship a product. If platform design dictates happiness, and these leaders have zero control over the code, aren't their hands just completely tied?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it makes total sense why leaders need to care.
Okay.
A founder obviously can't rewrite the algorithm, but they absolutely must understand that their young employees are carrying with them when they log on at 9 a.m.
The baggage, basically.
Right. The source material explains that young employees are bringing this highly complex relationship with technology and that resulting cognitive fatigue we talked about straight into the workplace. They're carrying the emotional weight of growing up in an era that researchers explicitly describe as historically difficult for young people. You just can't lead a team effectively if you are blind to the psychological state they're in by default.
So they're essentially arriving to work with their battery already at like 20%.
Exactly. The low battery warning is already flashing before the first meeting.
Wow. So if founders can't fix the internet, what can they do? How can the workplace function as an oasis from all that exhaustion?
Well,
And here's where it gets really interesting, because you'd assume the antidote to a tech-induced crisis would be, I don't know, forced digital detoxes or strict screen time limits at the office.
right. That's the logical assumption.
But the report drops this finding that fundamentally challenges that. The best predictor of Gen Z well-being isn't related to screen time at all. It's a sense of belonging.
Belonging. Yeah. The data proves it is this incredibly robust, measurable psychological need.
And how do they define that?
The report defines belonging as the feeling of genuinely mattering to the group of people you spend your days with. It is essentially the exact antithesis of that algorithmic experience.
Mattering to a group. That is, let's dig into why that's so powerful.
Yeah, please.
From a psychological standpoint, if a young person's primary environment outside of work is this isolating passive feed where they're just a data point, they feel totally invisible.
Completely invisible.
Right. So the workplace has the opportunity to act as the ultimate counterweight. It can be an environment where they are indispensable, where their specific contribution actually changes the outcome of the day.
And that ties right into evolutionary psychology.
Really? How so?
We are wired to need to be valuable to a small, close-knit group. When an individual feels like they matter to their tribe, it significantly reduces the cognitive load of survival anxiety. They feel psychologically safe.
That makes so much sense.
So if the digital world is stripping them of agency and connection, the workplace, whether it's physical or remote, has to consciously rebuild it.
Okay, for you listening right now, I want you to evaluate your own workplace. Think about the dynamics of your daily stand-up meetings or your team Slack threads.
That's a good exercise.
Do you feel like your presence actually changes the dynamic? Or do you feel like a highly replaceable cog in a machine? And if you're a leader, are you actively designing an environment where your team members would genuinely say they matter?
It's a tough question to answer, honestly, and understanding that belonging is the solution is vital, but, the theory alone isn't going to change a company's culture. Knowing the destination doesn't give you the map.
Right, which brings us to the operational part of the source material.
Yeah.
How does a leader actually implement belonging on a random Tuesday when, quarterly targets are looming?
Yeah, you can't just mandate human connection with a corporate memo. Please feel a sense of belonging by Friday.
Exactly. Mandatory belonging at 3 p.m. So, to get practical, the article highlights the work of a researcher, Cindy Nelson. She actually recently completed her dissertation specifically on Gen Z in the workplace.
And Nelson's research operates on this great premise. Leaders do not need another list of anxiety statistics.
Right, we have enough of those.
They need practical, actionable tools to engage and retain and develop their youngest employees. And the source synthesizes her research into this 4-step playbook that leaders can literally implement tomorrow.
Okay, let's break down this playbook. The first step focuses on communication. And the mandate here is to design for real conversation, not just communication.
There's a massive structural difference between sending a transactional message and actually engaging in a reciprocal dialogue.
Right. Like, An email is transactional.
Exactly. A Slack message or an email is primarily designed to just transfer information efficiently. But efficiency does not build belonging.
Wow, that's a great point.
The report's data shows that active reciprocal communication is deeply associated with higher well-being. And reciprocal communication means a two-way exchange of ideas, where both parties are actively listening and responding in real time.
It's the difference between assigning a task and actually discussing a problem.
Yeah.
If a manager's only interaction with a young employee is just like pinging them a list of deliverables and getting a thumbs up emoji back,
Yeah.
the employee remains totally isolated.
Completely. And building in deliberate moments for genuine conversation. It costs the organization absolutely $0, but the compounding benefits to the employee's psychological safety are just enormous.
So how do leaders actually architect these moments?
It can be as simple as dedicating the first 5 minutes of a one-on-one meeting to an open-ended discussion about a project's challenges, rather than just immediately running down a status checklist.
Just putting the human element back in.
Exactly. It requires replacing a fraction of that transactional digital noise with relational human interaction.
And speaking of digital noise, that leads us to the second step in Nelson's playbook. Leaders need to audit how their team is actually using technology at work.
This is huge.
It turns out the workplace often mimics the exact same passive consumption loops that drain Gen Z on social media.
Right. Most founders and managers are severely disconnected from how much of their team's workday is just swallowed up by low-value digital friction.
What does that friction look like in practice?
We're talking about redundant software tools, endless email chains, or project management platforms that take more time to update than it actually takes to just complete the task.
Oh, I've definitely used those platforms.
Yeah.
It creates this massive cognitive drag. It's basically the equivalent of making a marathon runner carry a backpack full of rocks.
That's the perfect analogy.
It's like looking in your fridge and throwing out all the digital junk food so your team isn't just snacking on low-value tasks all day. So the playbook advises leaders to eliminate the guesswork. Just ask your teams directly.
Ask them what digital tools feel like a waste of your time. The employees on the front lines know exactly where the friction is.
They really do.
And redesigning those technology habits serves a dual purpose. Obviously, it streamlines operations. But more importantly, it functions as a targeted well-being intervention.
Right, by clearing out the clutter.
Exactly. By clearing out that digital clutter, you reduce the passive administrative consumption that drains their mental state, and that frees up cognitive bandwidth for the active creative work that actually fosters a sense of accomplishment.
Okay, so once you clear away that toxic tech friction, you have the bandwidth to focus on what actually moves the needle. Which brings us to steps 3 and 4. And this is a really provocative piece of Nelson's research.
Yeah, this is where it gets challenging for some traditional managers.
Leaders must begin treating belonging as a hard business metric. The playbook suggests building what they call belonging checkpoints into leadership rhythms.
Because if belonging is the single most powerful predictor of well-being, and well-being dictates performance, then belonging can no longer be relegated to, like, an annual generalized HR survey.
Okay, but pushback time again. Measuring belonging.
Yeah.
How do you put a KPI on a feeling without it becoming this dystopian, forced, fun corporate exercise?
Rate your belonging from 1 to 10.
Yeah, no, right. I can hear managers asking, how do you track a subjective emotion the same way you track quarterly sales or customer acquisition costs?
This raises an important question, but the answer is that you measure it through direct qualitative inquiry during routine check-ins. A belonging checkpoint isn't a numerical scale.
Okay.
It's a manager asking specific, targeted questions during a one-on-one. Questions like, when was the last time you felt your specific work helped the team succeed?
Oh, that's good.
Or, do you feel you have a voice in how we execute our current project? If the employee struggles to answer those questions, the manager has identified a vulnerability in the team's ecosystem.
And the financial reality is that the absence of belonging has a catastrophic cost.
It destroys retention.
Yeah. The hidden costs of disengagement like quiet quitting, the massive expense of recruiting and replacing an employee, the constant drain on institutional knowledge. All of that directly impacts the bottom line.
Absolutely. Cindy Nelson's research highlights that you simply cannot retain talent that feels they don't matter. Tracking the health of your team's belonging is essentially proactive risk management for your human capital.
Because a team that feels invisible will eventually act invisible.
They will withdraw their discretionary effort. They'll do the bare minimum.
To prevent that, Leaders have to shift their perspective on mental health entirely, which is the final intervention in the playbook. The superficial checkbox solutions are no longer acceptable.
The source gets very pointed here.
Yes, it does. It explicitly points out that providing an employee assistance program, an EAP, and buying a corporate bulk subscription to a meditation app does not constitute a mental health strategy.
No, it doesn't. But we see organizations deploy those tools and consider the issue resolved. Check the box, move on. But offering a meditation app does not alter the environment that is causing the distress in the first place.
Exactly.
If you employ young people today, you must acknowledge the historical context of the world they're navigating.
And the goal isn't for managers to become therapists, right? You aren't supposed to diagnose your team members.
No, definitely not.
The goal is to build an infrastructure of psychological safety where admitting a struggle isn't viewed as a career-ending vulnerability.
Because if a young employee believes that admitting they're feeling burned out or overwhelmed will result in, a covert performance improvement plan or cost them a future promotion.
They'll just hide it.
Exactly. They will camouflage their struggle until they completely crash. The most effective founders meet their Gen Z employees where they are.
And meeting them where they are requires human-to-human empathy, not a sterile HR protocol.
Right.
It means a leader actually saying, I see that you're carrying a heavy load right now. How can we restructure your priorities this week? That level of genuine support fundamentally changes an employee's relationship with their work.
It replaces isolation with integration.
Well said. So let's pull all of these threads together and look at the broader territory we've explored today.
It's been a journey.
We started with the jarring paradox from the 2026 World Happiness Report. The youngest generation in the world's most opportunity-rich nations is experiencing a profound crisis of unhappiness.
Yeah.
We explored the neurological and psychological drain of passive, algorithmic digital environments, understanding that our employees are arriving to work already cognitively depleted.
And through the research, we identified that the most potent countermeasure is not found in technology, but in that deep evolutionary need for belonging.
Right. We reviewed Cindy Nelson's actionable framework for leaders, prioritizing reciprocal conversation over transactional messaging, aggressively auditing digital friction to preserve cognitive bandwidth.
Measuring belonging as a critical retention metric.
Yes, and establishing genuine psychological safety rather than relying on superficial wellness apps.
It really represents a fundamental evolution in how organizations must manage human capital.
It does. And as we synthesize all of this, I want to leave you with one final thought to explore on your own. We've framed this entire discussion around Gen Z's specific unhappiness and their unique relationship with the digital world.
Right, that was the focus.
But look objectively at the solutions the research demands. Eliminating useless technology that wastes time, prioritizing genuine human connection, ensuring every individual feels their work truly matters, and building an environment where it's safe to be a human being who occasionally struggles.
None of those interventions are exclusively beneficial to a 24-year-old.
Exactly.
Those are just the hallmarks of a highly functional, healthy organization.
So the question is this. If Gen Z's profound unhappiness is the alarm bell forcing companies to fundamentally redesign how teams communicate and to prioritize genuine belonging over blind, machine-like productivity,
could Gen Z's crisis actually be the exact catalyst we needed to fix broken, alienating workplace cultures for every single generation?
maybe they aren't the problem to be solved. Maybe they're the canary in the coal mine that forces us to build a better mind.
I love that.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We really challenge you to take these insights, especially those belonging checkpoints, and actually implement them in your next team meeting.
The data is clear. An environment that actively fosters connection is the only place where real growth can happen.
Take care of your team's environment, and we'll catch you next time.